Now let's talk about cells. And cells are the structural and functional units of life. And there are two basic types of cells. Ones that are eukaryotic and other ones that are prokaryotic. And I'm sure that you have seen this, that you have studied this in high school. I'm going to show you a video in the class and I will ask you a few questions. But right now I want that you compare this cell with this cell. Yeah. Okay, what are the difference? Try to think about three differences. If you want, you can stop the video and try to differentiate between this prokaryotic cell and this eukaryotic cell. Okay, now that you thought about those differences, and those differences, remember them because they will be in a quiz. So based on these schematics, I ask you what are the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And definitely size is one difference. This is much larger than a prokaryotic cell. So prokaryotic cells are small, while eukaryotic cells are larger than those. Then the complexity. Yeah, so the eukaryotic cells is much more complex than a prokaryotic cell. So you can see, for example, all these organelles. You have a nucleus here. You can have all these different organelles that they could be chloroplasts, mitochondria. You can have a wide number of different organelles. However, here you don't have a nucleus. Yeah, it's called prokaryotic before nucleus. So there is no nucleus. So we have talked about size. We have talked about the complexity. So eukaryotic cells are bigger, are more complex. And the last one is the DNA location. Why? Because this one, the DNA is located here in eukaryotic cells. Let's suppose that this is a molecule of DNA, not very pretty, but here you have the DNA inside of the nucleus. However, in the prokaryotic cells, there is no nucleus, so the DNA is located here inside of the cytoplasm. And so in this slide, I told you that there are two types of cells, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. And I ask you to compare these two types of cells. And we talk about three main differences: size, the complexity, and finally the DNA location. So we just said that the prokaryotic cells were smaller and simpler, and as a result we think that they were first to evolve. Actually, we thought that we have found evidence that there are cells that look prokaryotic cells that look like mitochondria and other ones that look like chloroplast. Yeah, two organelles. So what we think is that in the beginning there were different prokaryotic cells, and one that it was pretty big went close to these different ones and partially ate it, and this is how you produce a eukaryotic cell. So a eukaryotic cell possibly originate by the phagocytosis, and we will study that term, by a cell that partially ate other cells, and this process is called endosymbiosis, and we will talk about that. Don't worry, this is not going to be in your first test, but I want just to show you that there are so many things that we will learn in this class, like what is the origin of eukaryotic cells and examples, and we will talk about that. In particular about the mitochondria and about the chloroplast. On the other hand, eukaryotic contain membrane enclosed organelles. So this is another, could be the four difference. I gave you three, this is another one. They also have nucleus containing DNA, and they are found both in plant, animals, and fungi. And this could be another different. Prokaryotes are found in our groups that are bacteria and archaea, and I will talk about that in a second. Now I'm going to talk about how living organisms interact with their environment and how they do it. They exchange matter and energy. And we will talk a lot about that at the end of the class when we talk about photosynthesis and when we talk about fermentation and cellular respiration. So there are two major processes. The first one is the recycling of chemical nutrients, and maybe you have heard about the recycling of CO2 and oxygen that is very important for the survival of the earth. So this plant is producing oxygen, while these animals were producing CO2, and this balance is very important. And it's not the only cycle that we have. We have also the water cycle that we will talk just briefly, and we have other chemicals, nitrogen, phosphorus, all of them require this balance. So recycling of chemical is very important. And in class, we will talk about how carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and it can work as a thermoregulator of the earth. So just small changes in CO2 can dramatically change how our environment look like. And in class, we're going to do an exercise and I'm going to talk about the age of giant insects. We're going to watch a video, and this is not going to be in an exam or in a test. It's just a cool application of what you're learning. That every time that there is a change between the carbon dioxide and the oxygen, there are dramatic change in living organisms, and this is a pretty example that we will talk in class. Now we're going to talk about the second feature of living organisms. So the first one was that they exchange matter and energy, and they are constantly recycling those that matter and energy. The other second one is that there is a one-way flow of energy through the ecosystem. So it goes from the sun and it goes into the plants that they do photosynthesis and they turn that chemical energy into glucose, and then other organisms eat those plants, and then they get that energy. And we will talk about all the importance of this chemical energy and how there is a recycling. However, in each step of this that is taking place here, you are losing energy. So in terms of heat, so heat is lost from the ecosystem, so we're losing energy. So for that reason, there is only one way of flow of energy through an ecosystem. And this is a summary of maybe what you study in high school. Something that is very interesting is independent of all this diversity of living organisms. We have plants, animals, bacteria, archaea. We have so much diversity of living organisms. All of them, they have DNA and they have a common genetic code, and we will watch a video in class about it. But right now I just want to remind you that genes are the units of inheritance that transmit the information from parents to the offspring. And if you remember, here is the DNA, and the DNA is located in a cell, and here in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell, you have these structures. Do you remember how these structures are called? These linear structures that look like this during cell division. Yeah, this is not very pretty, but they look like this. Let's suppose they look like this. And they are called chromosomes. This is very important. We will talk about this. So genes are grouped into a very long DNA molecules called chromosomes. So sorry for the not very pretty image, but this is supposed to be a chromosome, and they control the activities of a cell. And when we talk about cancer, we will see that cells can start having problems in the DNA, so you can start missing, changing pieces of DNA, missing an entire section of a DNA, and even when it's more dangerous, you can miss an entire part of a chromosome, or you can exchange one part of a chromosome to another part of a chromosome. So this is why you have all this lack of regulation in cell division, because you lack the control of the activities of the cells. In the previous slide, we studied that the unity of life is based on the DNA. Now in this one, we will talk about the genetic code, that is the other component. And we know that all life forms use essentially the same code. So all of them, they have DNA, and what they do later is a process called transcription, that is the production of messenger RNA using as a template DNA. Then they use another process called translation, and they use as a template messenger RNA to produce proteins. And independent of the living organisms, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, archaea, all of them use this. And right now there is a huge research in all this area. So generally we have been talking about genomics, that is the study of the whole genome, because we know that the diversity of life arrives from difference in DNA. But right now we are not only focused on genomics, we can also compare all the proteins, and there is a lot of work doing that, and even the metabolism, that is the whole set of metabolites, that is very important. It's also studied. So we are studying not only the genes, we are studying the entire process of life to understand how we can be so similar and but look so different if we only have different small difference in the DNA.